Um, and we will start our chat. I know a lot of people were you have a lot of Guiding Light fans, can I just say, because I put out on my Facebook page yesterday if people had questions for you, and the number one question was people are wanting a Guiding Light reunion. So you
Yeah,
and
I get
Kim
that a
Zimmer
lot.
are going to have to make it happen for us.
I get that a lot. Yeah. I mean, first of all, hello everybody there in Facebook land, and thank you for being here. That question is unfortunately in the hands of Procter and Gamble more than anything else, and they've made it very clear over the years that they're just not going to release the characters and the copyrights to the show. So unless somehow that changed someday, I mean, we have reunions all the time. You know, there's a yearly fundraiser for for autism that we do in New York around a bowling sort of thing. So I see 10 of my ex-co-stars from Guiding Light there. So we personally have reunions. Kim Zimmer and I have been on stage together many times over the last few years. We see each other a lot. But in terms of what you're talking about, where there might be some kind of a production where there's an actual reunion and we see where Josh and Reva are today and that kind of thing on their probably 15th marriages or whatever, unless Procter & Gamble somehow is willing to sort of shake loose of hanging on to the rights to the show, I don't see it happening. And then I also work together in other ways. You know, Crystal Chappelle, who played Olivia, produces the web series Venice. And they're in there. We shot our 6th year, I think, recently, and I've been in 4 of 6 of those seasons playing a character. And last season, Kim Zimmer also played a character and we worked opposite each other quite a bit on that show. So you still see that sort of Josh Reva dynamic happening, just in a different show.
You'll always be Josh and Reva to so many of your fans, I have a feeling, but you've had this amazing career, and I want to kind of start at the beginning because you really didn't go to school. You didn't go to college with the intent of becoming an actor. So when did you kind of get bit by the acting bug, and what were you studying in college when you went?
I was studying psychology, you know, specifically family dynamics. I come from a big, crazy family, and I've always tried to understand how all of it works. And I entered into Cal State Northridge as a psychology major, and in my second, I think the second semester of my second year, I took an acting class as an elective just to get rid of 3 credits, you know, and I realized very early in the process that these 2 fields really are so similar, that they're both about pursuing human behavior and why we do the things that we do and why we make the choices that we make. We know this is the best choice down this road, the healthiest choice, and then we go, yeah, but that one much more interesting. I'm going to go that way and see how it goes. And then we're trying to figure out how to, you know, fix the stuff that we brought upon ourselves. And that's what I'm really interested in. And so at some point I switched my major over to theater. Sometimes I wish I had stayed with a psychology major. You know, and I did, you know, I was really interested in Tennessee Williams and Eugene O'Neill and Edward Albee and those guys. They were the ones that I was really taken by, and they write a lot about family dynamics. And then I did some musicals here and there on the side. I wasn't a singer really back then, but I did a couple of roles on stage. And then when I left college, I did a season of summer stock. Oh, and I was also studying at the Strasberg Institute in Los Angeles. This is all in the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles, where I grew up. And then right after I graduated, I went and did a season of summer stock at the Barn Theater in Augusta, Michigan, outside of Kalamazoo, which is still a place I consider my theater home. And I got my equity card there, which is the theater union card. And I went from there for about 10 days to New York, what was supposed to be 10 days in New York, to meet some people. I had already, you know, worked out a deal with an agent in Los Angeles. He had an office in New York, wanted me to meet some people there. And they sent me on a couple of auditions. And a couple of them were soap operas. And I had never seen a soap opera in my life, other than Dark Shadows, which is a whole other thing. And I never acted on camera in my life. And The first one that I don't talk about very much, I actually auditioned for All My Children. And they weren't casting any major roles at that time, but they offered me an under 5, which in union speak is literally under 5 lines of dialogue. Right? And I was kind of, oh, that's cool, great. And they were going to pay me like, oh, a lot of money. That's fantastic. And then I went in for the folks at Guiding Light. And I met Betty Ray, who was the casting director at that time. And she was just an extraordinary human being even then. And I read for this role, and she ran me down the hall to meet the head writer, Doug Marlin. And then they gave me an 8-page scene and said, can you come in tomorrow and audition? And I said, and screen test, not just audition, screen test. And I went in the next day, and there were half a dozen other guys, including someone you know, Scott Bryce.
Yes.
Yes. So Scott and I both were auditioning for Josh, and they cast me, obviously, as Josh, offered me a 3-year contract, which was, and a stipend to move to New York City, which to me was like everything. And that even played into my whole theater thinking, because New York is the center of theater, really, in this country. And they hired Scott to play Craig Montgomery on As the World Turns from that audition. So it worked out well for both of us. And then I had 6 days to go home to LA, where I had not been in 4 months, and pack up my life and move to New York, and I did.
So when you get that call that you're going to move to New York, you're going to have this role. I think I read that you were like 22 years old. So there's so much fandom, especially around the older soap operas. I mean, Guiding Light, As the World Turns from the radio days, they have such a fan base, go back a really long time.
Yeah.
So when you get that role, how does a 22-year-old stay grounded in a soap opera world? Or did you not stay grounded?
I was just going to say, I don't know that. I'm pretty sure I didn't stay terribly grounded during that time period. I mean, I was 22 years old, living in Manhattan in a 1-bedroom apartment in Greenwich Village. And I was single, and I just really had a great time. And I enjoyed the show. I enjoyed the city. I had fallen in love with Manhattan actually 2 years earlier, because Cal State Northridge, the college I took my degree from, they would take a bunch of us there once a year. And I would see these amazing musicals and plays, and just this incredible city with, where everything's at right angles for the most part, and the subways and all of it. I loved it. I just loved all of it. I'm one of those guys that actually liked Times Square more back when it was like, porno shows and drug deals. It just had like a seedy, cool feel to it. I really liked it back in those days. And now it's like a mall, it's like Disney-fied and all that. But I mean, I stayed grounded in friendships, friendships from my childhood, friendships from one of my closest friends today, I met actually at the Barn Theater, and he and I are still almost best friends to this day. We are best friends to this day. And then I also stayed very much in contact with my family at home, my father, my mom at home, and I have 3 brothers and 3 sisters, and then my new family became the people on the show, and with John Wesley Shipp playing Kelly, and Jennifer Cook playing Morgan, and Lisa Brown, and Michael Tylo, and these were all my friends now. And then I learned by watching the older people. So I would watch Jerry Bedorn and Bill Rourke and Sharita Bauer, and I would watch how they worked. Chris Bruneau, and I learned how to manage this whole camera thing, because remember, I was trained only on stage. I had to figure out this whole camera thing. So those 3 years were, and at that time the shows were so popular still, You'd go to like Studio 54 and there'd be a line around the block to get in, and it'd be like, hey, Josh, come on in, let's go. I remember, all kinds of clubs like that, or even something as simple as Planet Hollywood or something. You could just walk in the door whenever, it was a special time, and invited to parties all the time. And Grant Alexander and I became very good friends. Michael O'Leary and I, and we're all still very good friends, you know. So that's kind of how, if I stayed as grounded as I stayed, that's how I managed it.
The one thing when I was working in As the World Turns, and I work behind the scenes in the production side of it, but the one thing that struck me all the time about it is that, first of all, soap opera actors are the hardest working people in the
Yes.
business. And second of all, it's like putting on a new theater production 5 days a week. How
Really
did
every day.
every single day?
The
I
one
mean,
act
that's
every
what it,
day, basically.
the sets getting struck up and down. I mean, the sets, you know, I said As the World Turns, I don't know how it was at Guiding Light. The sets would go up and down on a daily basis sometimes, to make sets. The actors are constantly learning lines under fire, it seemed like. So how did that experience of playing Josh inform how you evolved as a stage actor? Or did it not? I mean, it had to.
Well, that's really jumping like way ahead. I can answer that question today. Um, that's so interesting. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that question, so my mind is going like 10 places, so bear with me. But my first thought is my theater training and work informed my soap opera work. And Betty Ray, the casting director I mentioned, she would scour the theaters of New York City looking for people. And most of the people that were cast at that time had very strong theater backgrounds. Mine wasn't in New York, but I had a very strong, that's how I was trained. Kim Zimmer was trained in the theater, you know. And I think that what she saw in that was the discipline it takes to be a stage actor is a similar discipline to what's expected and needed to do soap opera work. You know, I always wondered, like, how, when they're casting, do they know that that person is going to be able to handle 20 pages of dialogue today and 30 pages tomorrow, and then 10 pages the next day, and then 12 pages, and then 50, you know, it's like you're constantly being handed all this stuff to work with. And we've had actors in the past who have come and gone who couldn't handle it and didn't last very long, you know. But and then now jumping to 30 years later, you know, I have no fear of, first of all, being on stage at all. I have no fear of memorizing dialogue or learning blocking. Often, if I have like a 3-week rehearsal period for a musical, I think it's too long. I'm like, well, what am I going to do after the first, week? Because, I walk in the door. I almost always walk in the door first thing of rehearsal, first day of rehearsal. I always have all the music already done. And I have probably 80 to 90% of the dialogue already memorized. Because that's the way I had to do it on the soap, and it's just the way it's in my body. The hardest stage play I've ever done with Kim Zimmer was Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. That was by far and away the most difficult dialogue I've ever memorized, and probably one of the most rewarding roles I've ever played, George and Martha. But that was the first time, and that was about 3 years ago, that I ever felt so overly taxed in the task of trying to get all of Albie's words into my brain. But I think it helps me to move very quickly and very nimbly in rehearsals on stage. I can change directions a lot. If a director wants me to do this instead of that, I might fight for a minute or two if I really feel strongly about it, but I'm always ready to go. I used to have a 1-minute rule at Guiding Light where I would fight with the director about something for 1 minute, and then I would do it however they wanted me to do it. It was like, that's it. I got it out of my system. Let's go. So later, when a fan comes up to me and goes, I can't believe that Josh did that the other day, I could say, yeah, I thought it was not right too.
And Doug Marland, you mentioned him. He also wrote for As the World Turns. He was just an exceptional television
Oh my gosh.
writer.
Pam Long comes to mind. I mean, Nancy Curley and Stephen Demarest writing together. That there was some really extraordinary talent writing that show. And earlier you said, that you learned that the hardest working people in the business are soap opera actors, and I agree with that. But I also think in many ways they're the most underappreciated. by the rest of the business.
Totally agree
You
with
know,
that.
I never see soaps depicted unless it's some kind of a farce or a, you know, the closest they came maybe was Tootsie, but even that had like the leading man who was like, "Hey, how you doing? Good to see you." You know, and they have caricatures when they're portraying, or you see Saturday Night Live or Joey Tribbiani and Friends, or you know, whatever. It's always like a joke. It's a mockery. But I'll tell you, I worked with some of the great actors I've ever known. Larry Gates, Jordan Clark, Kim Zimmer. You know, these Justin Dees. My hat's off to every one of those people, and I couldn't ask for better people to work with on camera than those people.
I agree. I think soap opera actors are very underrated because after being there and seeing how hard they work, I think it's a it should not be as farcical as it is. I mean, I kind of get it. You know, soaps are overdramatic or something. You know, storylines, but the acting is really good. Is really good if you tease it apart, I think.
It's also very immediate and fresh and moment to moment, because sometimes in a studio when you're shooting a scene, it really is moment to moment. You know, you're not thinking about what's going to happen in the next beat because you're trying to figure out what's happening in this beat.
Right
You
there.
know, and you just have to like hang on by your fingertips and go through this scene. Many of the scenes that Kim and I did together, I was talking recently about the fountain scene, you know, and fans always know that scene. It was in one take. We did that in a single take. You know, when I do nighttime work now, this is my favorite example. When one of the scenes I shot on Homeland a couple of years ago, it was just two guys on a sidewalk walking and talking for about 3 pages. It was a nighttime set on location. They called me onto the set at 6 p.m. We wrapped at 2 a.m., 8 hours later, for 3 pages of dialogue. And I thought we would have shot not quite all of an episode of Guiding Light, but pretty close in that same 8-hour period. I prefer moving that way. And that's why in theater, you know, right now the big challenge for actors in theater is that as a money-saving device, rehearsal periods are getting shorter. And you can have when I work at Pittsburgh Civic Light Opera, I've got 9 days to put on a big musical from the day you arrive to the day you have 2,000 people in the audience. That's super tight. And that's back to your original question, where my soap opera training, I think, helps me to move that quickly through that process.
Are people surprised? I mean, you've been in a lot of musicals. You were in Annie at Cape Fear Regional. You were in Annie on the North Carolina theater stage. And you said you just did Sweeney Todd. Are people surprised you can sing? Are your fans, I guess, are your fans surprised you can sing?
Well, a couple of times they asked me to sing on the show, and I said no. The closest I came to singing on the show was I sort of talk sing. They had a sequence where Reva had run away down to someplace in Texas, and they had this scene where Josh walks into a bar, and Reva's up there, of course, singing to the crowd in the bar, you know, and it's a very pretty romantic song, and she starts to sort of, you know, like Kim does, and breaks down. And it was written that Josh continues the song from the back of the room and walks up singing, and then she joins him, and then they finish in harmony. And I was like, that's not going to happen. That's just not going to happen. And so we finally settled on me speaking a couple of the lyrics to her, and then Reva picks up the song and finishes it on her own, which is exactly right. I just never wanted to sing on the show. And quite frankly, I don't feel like my voice was really, you know, I'm not well-trained vocally in my 20s. And then I stopped doing theater for many years because of the soap. And then I was seeing a friend of mine in a show on Broadway, and I thought, I miss that. I want to do that. So I started studying with an opera teacher not that I wanted to sing opera, but in New York City. And I just, for the first 2 years of singing again, all I did was sing with him. And I learned where to place my voice and how to support my voice, and, you know, the proper way to make a vowel and those kinds of things. And then I started working on specific numbers from specific shows. And then eventually I felt good enough to audition for something. The first musical I did after not singing in probably 15 years publicly was a production of the musical Nine, playing Guido Catino, which is a very demanding piece. And I kind of limped through it and got through it okay. And that was probably 15 years ago. And I still continue to study, and I still study even today. I still am constantly trying to make my voice better than it was. And over the years now, I think it's gotten to a place where I'm pretty comfortable with it. When you can get through a show like Sweeney Todd and not lose your voice, like, that's the role that destroyed Len Camerer's voice, Sweeney Todd. You got to be careful in that role. You can do a lot of shouting in that role, and it really does damage. But I feel like I'm at a place now where my voice is, so even I'm surprised that I can sing. And I'm very pleased that I can.
You worked on Guiding Light. You mentioned Homeland. You've done so you did the daytime drama. You did some network dramas, NCIS. You did the cable show Homeland, and then you did Netflix. You did House of Cards. How have you seen television or the small screen? Because I don't know that Netflix wants to be called television, but how have you seen the small screen TV medium evolve since when you started on Guiding Light?
Well, and keep in mind too, I spent many years on the national board of the Actors Union. First many years on the national and local boards for AFTRA, which was the union that represented the soap operas and talk shows and game shows and things like that. And then when the unions merged, I became the first national vice president in the category of actors and performers. So I have about 12 years overall of union experience. So when you ask that question, I think about how I saw it evolve contractually and how things had to change. House of Cards was a game changer for us. House of Cards was really the first successful, I wouldn't even call it a web series now, but it was the first series that was only available streaming, right? So all of our contracts to that point have been based on residuals. The idea that there's it plays once and then everything repeats, and then it gets played again and again and again and again. And so you get paid this amount of money for the first showing, which is your paycheck, and then you get paid pretty much the same when it plays the second time, and then every time it plays, you get less and less and less. And I still get checks from NCIS and for Law and Order, and I still get checks from Hunter. The show I shot back in 1989 or something like that, and they're like for 12 cents, So we had to come up with a whole different structure. And I'm getting a little off point. I'll get back on point. But we had to come up with a whole different structure to figure out how to match that kind of payment in this new format where all the episodes get released in a single moment. And they're available 24/7 to anybody who subscribed. So we did that. But I want to answer your question too this way. There was an effort when Guiding Light ended, there was an effort to try to get it onto some other format, one of the cable shows. I think they talked much about Netflix then, but there were, I just can't get them into my head, but they had reached out to a couple of different of the cable networks then. And it just didn't work out because then people didn't really know fully how to monetize something on the web. I think now, if there were an opportunity to bring Guiding Light back, I think it could happen on something like Netflix or definitely on Hulu. But it could happen on one of these because their format is different enough now. They're not making money per episode. They're making money based on the number of subscribers. So if Guiding Light were to bring in another 4 million subscribers to Hulu, that might work for them. I think our paychecks would be a lot different. Smaller.
Yeah.
but in today's world, I think it would have worked back then it just couldn't work. And they did try to do it, do a web thing with, what was it? All My Children in One Life or something like that, or.
Yeah, and I know As the World Turns had the conversations about, there were conversations about As the World Turns going on the web, and they just didn't work. But
no, they actually tried it with Days of Our Lives and something else. I think All My Children.
Maybe All My Children. Yeah. I feel like All My.
They had one season and then it all kind of fell apart, and I don't really know exactly what went wrong there, but it just didn't work.
Now, I want to talk about, you were going to return to Cape Fear Regional Theater and play Ed Boon in The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Night Time. And following this interview, I want everybody to head over to the Cape Fear Regional Theater Facebook page, because they're having a virtual book club, and various actors from the show are reading chapters from the book. You'll be reading one April 6th.
Monday night at 8 p.m.
Yes. Yeah. Now, I've seen this show twice now, and we talked a little bit about it before we went on camera. The first time I saw this show, the character of Ed Boon was really vilified. He was the villain. The mom was the villain. The second time I saw it, there was a lot of, the actor brought a lot of empathy into the part. So in approaching the role and studying up on the role, how do you see Ed Boon?
Well, again, I'm going to answer a little bit in the context of Josh, because Josh started out a bad guy for the first 3 years. I'm going to get around to answering that question, but Josh started out a bad guy for the first 3 years, and that was Doug Marlin. And then actually the first year and a half. And then Doug left the show and Pam Long came into the show. And especially with bringing Reva onto the show, they really wanted Josh to become a good guy. So they created this storyline where there was an oil spill down in Venezuela, and they had Josh literally handing out money to widows and orphans, and he had an epiphany and he becomes a good guy. And then as the years went on, Josh was more or less considered sort of the hero of the show and the good man and all this stuff. But every time we would have a new writer come in, I would say, and we talk, and I'd say, I don't want you to write just, the good guy. I just want him to be a guy. I think people struggle in life, and I think they can do really good things, but I think they can also do really bad things. And it doesn't necessarily make that person a bad person if they make poor choices. And there are consequences of those choices, and they learn from those choices. This is how life works. This goes all the way back to what I was talking about with my days as a psychology major. Why do we make the choices we make? All that to say, when I think of Ed Boon, I think if and when I get around to playing the role, I don't think I'm going to see any reason to put more on him to make him more of a villain. I don't think he's a villain. I think he's a man who's gone through some really difficult things, not the least of which is a single father raising a teenager on the spectrum. And Christopher isn't a little bit on the spectrum. My daughter, Kendall, at 27, is on the spectrum. Not that she's a little bit on, but she's more functional than Christopher is. Let's put it that way. But Christopher is not an easy kid. And I did read a commentary about this relationship between Christopher and Ed that talked about there are similarities between them. Christopher really loses his temper in a big way and lashes out physically at people. He smacks a cop in the very first scene, right, for touching him. And so when Ed, I don't want to give out a lot of spoilers on the show, but when Ed lashes out at Christopher, it's not very much unlike Christopher lashing out at other people. Ed has dealt with this whole issue with his wife and raising this kid, and then this whole investigation is happening, and it does lead Ed down a path of getting more and more I don't want to say challenged, but he gets more and more tense about what Christopher's doing, wanting to stop him from doing what he's doing because he knows what the end game is. And so he loses his temper and bad things happen. And Christopher leaves him. But I do think, and again, I'm going to try to stay away from details here. I do think by the time we get to Act 2, and Ed is trying to find his way back for him and Christopher to have a relationship again. I think it's very genuine. And I think he is genuinely sorry for what he has done. And when he says, I'll never do it again, I believe he means he'll never do it again. So I don't see him as a good guy or a bad guy. I just see him as a guy, and I don't have the struggles in my life that Ed has. So it's hard for me to stand back. And the other thing I'd said to you before the show was, I was talking about a interview with Anthony Hopkins way back 100 years ago that I think happened. I think it was on Carson, actually. So that's how long ago it was. He was playing Adolf Hitler, right, in a miniseries. And Carson was asking him about a bad guy. And he said, well, when you're playing a bad guy, you can't think of him as a bad guy. Hitler thought he was saving the world. He thought he was the good guy, right? In playing Sweeney Todd or Ed or Captain Hook or whatever other crazy bad guy characters I played, you have to internally play it from the perspective that you are right. This also happened for me in Hunchback of Notre Dame, playing the Cardinal in Hunchback of Notre Dame, very similar to Javert in Les Mis. Javert thinks he's right all the way up to the minute he throws himself off a bridge. Yeah. He thinks he's right. And the fact that he was wrong all the time is what makes himself throw himself off the bridge. So to me, all these characters are sort of interconnected in humanity. I don't know how I'd feel about playing Jeffrey Dahmer, but we're not, outside of Sweeney, we're really not talking about that. I guess Sweeney's pretty close.
Were you familiar with the book and the play before taking on the role at Cape Fear?
Only like, having seen the ads for it or something like that. When Mary Kate called me about it, first of all, I just love her. I just adore Mary Kate Burke, and I think she's one of the most gifted people I've ever encountered in this business, and one of the nicest too, which is great. And I was very much looking forward to working with her as a director. She did not direct Annie. Robin Levine, who's also very gifted, directed Annie. Mary Kate was going to be directing Curious. And, we talked a little bit about the idea of it. And I knew about it too, because again, my daughter is on the spectrum. And, but I had not seen it. And she talked about wanting to make it a way to educate the community about what it's like to deal with somebody, a parent or a friend or a neighbor of someone who who lives in this world 24/7, and and I may, she can correct me on all of this, but I feel like in the conversation she talked about a fairly high percentage of people on the spectrum in the Fayetteville area, and that they had just built a big autism center, I think, and that she wanted to do this all as part of the community, to say to the community, this is what this world is like. And then she said that thing that, when you say this to actors, it's pretty hard for them to say no. And she's like, and you're the only person I could think of for Ed Boon. I mean, I only see you in that role. And that's the kind of thing that you're like, well, I guess I better, So, and then I went and read the book, obviously. She sent me the script a short time later. I went over that. The book and the script are extremely similar. And, I think it's an amazing show. And we did a reading of it,
Yes.
a few days ago. Mary Kate got us all together on Tuesday night last week, which was supposed to be or 2 weeks ago, which was supposed to be our first day of rehearsal. And through Zoom, we all got together and did a play reading. And it's going to be fun. I'm thinking of it more as a postponement and not so much a cancellation.
I hope it is a postponement. And I think I have a daughter on the spectrum as well. She is high functioning, much more high functioning, I think, than Christopher would be, or that he's been portrayed when I've seen the show. But one of the things I like about this production is when my daughter was diagnosed with autism, the only point of reference we had for anybody on the spectrum was Rain Man. And so when people would meet my daughter, they'd be like, yeah, she's not Rain Man. And she's
same with us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I appreciate this work because it presents a different part of the spectrum.
Yeah. We chatted a little bit after the reading, and Mary Kate said something that I thought was really interesting. She said it's really interesting that of all the characters, Christopher actually has the best tools for dealing with difficulties. Weirdly, he's actually pretty good at handling all this stuff that comes around him. He thinks through everything and works everything out in his mind before. I'll be reading through, when I do the chapters on Monday, I'll be reading through a big part of him being on the train, and then I don't want to give away stuff, getting to his destination and encountering the people he encounters after the train. And reading through the sequence where his pet mouse jumps onto the tracks, and he jumps down after him, and people go crazy, and it's really exciting. I'm looking forward to it.
So people can get a taste of you at least reading the chapter of the book on Monday.
Well, and I do have a very significant exchange involving Ed that I think will give people some kind of idea of, I thought about doing like one of his monologues here, but I just don't think I want to do that.
When you take on the role of a parent, whether it's as a character of Ed Boon or as Daddy Warbucks and Annie, are you, because you are a parent, are you drawing from that personal experience?
Yeah, I'm a real sucker for father-daughter relationships. I do more weeping in Annie than probably any Warbucks that's ever played the role. Any actor that's ever played Warbucks. And my daughter, kids with me about it all the time. She'll like warn me like about a movie. She'll be like, "Oh, Dad, I saw Moneyball the other day, and there's a big thing between a father and a daughter. So I'm just giving you a heads up. So when you see it, it's coming." And that would have also transferred. I also have a grown son, and I do. It's the father-daughter thing is probably more extreme to me, but the relationship between a parent and child, that means everything to me. And when it's broken, it just breaks my heart. Daddy Warbucks, really, there's this whole segment in Act 2. I just did the show again, at Portsmouth Playhouse in New Hampshire through Algonquin Playhouse. And there's a whole segment in the second act when they've just done their big dance, "I Don't Need Anything But You," and then the Mudges appear and claim to be your parents. And in the course of like 10 minutes of the second act, you just go through this crazy roller coaster of emotions. Because I don't look at Warbucks as a caricature. I look at the story overall as a father-daughter story, and that in a way he ends up sort of saving her life because he saves her from the Mudges, who were not real and might have killed her, but she really saves his life. And I think he becomes profoundly aware of that particularly the second act. I mean, it begins in the first act, but as the second act progresses, I think he becomes very aware of that she's made him a different kind of a person. And he now understands and it allows him to have a relationship with Grace at the end, towards the end. It's hard to play that up because it's not fully written there, but we kind of touched on that quite a bit too, So all of that kind of stuff touches my heart.
When your kids were growing up, obviously you're close to them, you're family man. Did they have any sense that you were on television and that that you had this fan base when you went out? Did they?
Oh yeah, I mean, when my daughter was very, very young, she would get scared, honestly. We took them when they were quite young to Italy. And at that time, Italy was one of the top-rated shows, daytime. Guiding Light was one of the top-rated shows, daytime or nighttime. They dubbed our voices into Italian, and it was like the Beatles. I mean, and when we got there, we were mobbed at the airport, and she freaked out. She was like 5, I think. In fact, I was there because the Italian television station invited me to come there, and they flew me and my whole family there into Milan for like 10 days. And just to do talk shows and game shows and all kinds of weird things, photo shoots. But I think they both understood First of all, my wife and I made a very conscious choice not to raise them in Los Angeles.
Mm.
When our daughter was born, that was actually the second time I had left Guiding Light. I had left twice for 2-year periods, and both times I went back to LA for a period of time. But when our daughter was born in LA, we really had to make a choice, wanted to make a choice about where to raise our kids. And we decided not to raise them in Los Angeles because everybody in Los Angeles is in the business. And all the kids are in the business. And all the kids have pictures and resumes and agents, So we raised them in about an hour north of Manhattan in a little tiny town called North Salem. And if either one of them ever wanted to go in the business, I would never have discouraged that. But we felt like we'd at least have a better shot at them evolving into other things rather than automatically default setting being, I'm going to be an actor when I grow up.
Mm.
And, of course, in LA, people thought we were nuts, thinking New York would be a better place to raise our children than Los Angeles. But I think it was. And I think they both ended up more grounded because of it. I think they were both, it was a great job to be a dad because I didn't travel very much at all because all of it was shot in Manhattan. There was a couple of appearances a year, but when I did charity golf events on Hilton Head, I would take the whole family with me. So that was great. I rarely worked 5 days a week.
Mm.
I usually worked 3 or 4 and sometimes 1 or 2, never on weekends. So I was able to coach soccer and coach baseball. And I was able to be there for a lot of things that other dads couldn't be there for. The one thing, though, that they did understand early on was when I couldn't be there, I really couldn't be there.
Really couldn't be there.
I couldn't call in and go, hey, I'm not feeling well today. Or, hey, my daughter's, going to be in a play and I have to stay and see it. And there were some things that I had to miss because I just had to miss them. And I think they understood it was a trade-off.
Mm. I love that. I think I think it's exciting when you see that people that you're a fan of are really nice people and they're actually family people. I know I think that's very appealing in the people that I've become fans of over the years. So I like that you're a family guy. I asked some of my social media followers to send me their questions for you because I wasn't sure if we were going to get thrown off Facebook. We're actually still on Facebook Live, so if anybody has any questions for Robert, you can type them into the comments and I will ask him. But last night, Jennifer asked, how hard was it to adjust from TV makeup to stage makeup? I think I remember on As the World Turns, a lot of the actors did their own hair and makeup. So what's the biggest difference between applying makeup for the stage and television?
Well, no, on the show, I never did my own makeup.
No.
Ever.
Okay.
On Guiding Light, I never did my own makeup. And, for men, it's different than women. To me, that would be a question that would be very different for women than it is for me. But I barely wear makeup on stage now. I really don't. I was trained back in college about putting on a base and putting on this and doing that thing. I don't do any of that stuff. I gave myself some eyebrows because, I've lost my eyebrows over the years, or they're fading away. And maybe something under my eyes or something like that, but that's it, and then I let it go. I played Edna recently in Hairspray, and that's the longest time I've spent in the makeup chair in a long time. In fact, if fans want to Google, go to YouTube, you can see a sped up video of me getting turned into Edna for that production. And that was about 20 or 30 minutes, maybe about 30 minutes in the makeup chair. And a wig and size 13 pumps, which I still have. I kept the shoes.
That's pretty funny. Jennifer L. wanted to know, what role on stage have you not played yet that you would like to play?
I've been really blessed to get through a lot of roles that I wanted to play. Sweeney was huge on my list. La Mancha, that's actually a drawing of me as La Mancha, a painting. I've done La Mancha twice. George was a big thing. Lion in Winter was a big thing in terms of non-musicals. There's some that I haven't played yet. I was just looking at a Captain Von Trapp somewhere. Uh, um, Henry Higgins I've not played yet in My Fair Lady. Um, but the one that I'm not going to play, and it makes me sad, is Jean Valjean. And the reason I'm not going to play that role is because it's written for a tenor, and that's just sometimes the way musicals work. If your voice isn't right for the role, you're not going to play it. I will play kick-ass Javert one day, but I can't play Valjean, and that just makes me sad.
She the same person, Jennifer, wanted to know what your favorite stage role has been to date.
I just mentioned them. I didn't mention one other one, which was Tevye. And I know you're looking at me right now and going, Tevye, really? But I did get the opportunity at the Barn Theater with a wonderful cast to play Tevye. And I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood in Los Angeles, and almost all of my friends were Jewish when I was younger, and they're still close friends now. And I actually reached out to a couple of my friends from that community and said, because when the director called me and asked about Tevye, I said, first I was like, what about him? And he said, well, what do you think about playing him? And I said, well, you do understand I'm Norwegian, right? And, so he said, we're going to make you look like Tevye. You just play the man who loves his daughters and loves his wife and struggles with God, and we'll take care of the rest of it. And it was an amazing experience. And I would love to play that role again one day. I'm hoping this Sweeney that I did recently was the first of a couple, because I would like to tackle him 2 or 3 more times. I think he's one of the, first of all, Sondheim, I think is just one of the great composers of our time. And the privilege to walk on that stage every night and sing that material was just stunning. It was stunning. And I would play that role again anytime, anywhere. I love that role. And La Mancha, I think I'll probably tackle again. Some of the really fun ones were Captain Hook. I always tell my friends that's the most fun, flat out fun you can have on stage in any role is Captain Hook. He's just a joy. And yeah, that's enough. Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah.
I'm reading some of the Facebook questions. Of all the, Tim wants to know, of all the storylines on Guiding Light, what was your favorite or most challenging?
The favorite was definitely what Kim and I have always referred to as the Cat on a Hot Tin Roof storyline, which was Josh in a wheelchair. He finds out that Riva has married his father, HB, and tears out and gets in a car accident. He's paralyzed from the waist down, and then he ends up living in HB's house, and Riva somehow gets him to walk again. I won't go too far down that road, but we always talk about that. It's because Larry Gates, Jordan Clark, Kim Zimmer, Krista Tesreau as Mindy, that was just an amazing time. My favorite single episode was Josh and Riva's first wedding to each other, that we shot out on location in Pennsylvania. I think that's the most beautiful episode I've ever seen. And then the most challenging, of course, was the cloning storyline. That was it was just difficult, and I really made the best of it that I could. It taught me a lot about being able to work through a story that makes no sense to you, that the audience doesn't like, but somehow you go into work and you do it anyway. And in a way, I feel like that helps me sometimes on stage too. Sometimes I'll do not long ago, I did an entry into the New York Theater Winter Festival of a new musical, and it just was not working. But somehow I managed to make the best of it and do the best I could do in it and be okay with it and not take responsibility for everything else. But the clone storyline was challenging. Anything that stepped outside of the real genre of soap opera. There was a time travel storyline and a mind control drug storyline, and all 3 of those storylines happened for me within a 2-year period, and that was by far the most challenging time there. I felt like Guiding Light's real strength was about families and fathers and sons and brothers and sisters and husbands and wives.
I think folks would agree with that. I'm kind of chuckling. I remember there was a time right after I worked for As the World Turns, the writers went on strike, but the show kind of went on with these writers and
I
scout,
remember that time. Yeah.
and some of the storylines were really wacky. So
What was
I
crazy for us then, for us, was that the storylines would down these wacky tracks. I don't know about World Turns, but I know when the writers came back to Guiding Light, they ignored all that.
yeah.
And they just stepped right back into where they were. And so like none of that happened. And it was long. It was several weeks. Yeah.
Mary Kate it is
Hi,
on
Mary Kate.
chat also, and she thanked you for doing this. I thank you too, and she said that one of the reasons Cape Fear wanted to do it is because North Carolina has the fourth highest population of people living with autism spectrum disorder. We do
Right.
have an unusually high percentage of folks on the spectrum here, so I think that's why this play is reimagined as much as it is why the book's taught in schools, that kind of thing. I don't want to get into the Cape Fear reading time because I do want everybody to go to the Cape Fear regional.
Really fun. I've watched a couple of them and they're really fun.
Yeah, go to the virtual book club at 8:00. But I have one more question for you. You've done so much. You've done TV, film. You even voiced a video game role part on Red Dead.
I didn't just voice that role. That's me. That
That's
was a
you.
full-on performance of it. Yeah. Yeah. I
They
spent that day
connect you to all the wires and
no,
the.
not wires. You're in that funky suit with the dots on it and everything, and you're doing those scenes, and then they make you animated. So I did both. The reason I say that is because there are actors in that genre who do only the physical parts of it, and then there are actors who do only the voice parts of it.
Mhm.
That's all me. That's my voice. That's my physicality. That's all me. Yeah. On Red Dead Redemption 2.
Red Dead. So, do you have a favorite medium? Stage, film, TV, video games?
Say that again.
Do you have a favorite medium that you've done, whether it's
Oh,
film or TV,
well,
stage?
definitely theater, but I will say that I really enjoyed the video game thing
Mm.
because that was very theatrical. You're just in this gigantic studio, and it's all white, and they mark like the sidewalks and the doors all with white PVC piping, and you just feel like you're in this big space and you can just be big and gaudy and all that. When I'm on television now, I feel like, and this is part of where television has gone over the years, is it gets very small and whispery to me.
Mm.
You know, like all of these procedural crime shows, they're all talking very, because they've been so, what they do is so horrible and harsh, it makes it painful for them to, and they all look the same to me. They all sound the same to me. And it's not that there aren't great things, my wife and I have been watching a couple of shows recently that are fantastic. We also watched The Tiger King, which just was like, oh my God. But I need to take a shower after that show. It's like that world was so, by the way, my wife was shouting behind me here to make sure that, that the pot belly on the character that I had in Red Dead Redemption was not mine.
Well, I want to thank you for joining me tonight. This has been very exciting. Like I told you before we went on, I tried to get the fangirl stuff out early, but I was a fan of Guiding Light and a fan of yours and Reva's. So very exciting for me to chat with you tonight. And I hope to see you on stage in this role because, like you said, I hope it's just postponed and that we get to see it on the Cape Fear stage. I'd be excited to see that.
Me too. I think it'd be fun to do. And I will tell you, the cast that Mary Kate put together, fantastic. They're really, yeah, to see them, to be able to do the reading with them on Zoom and see them all, really terrific stuff. And thank you. And let me say to the fans too of the show, what I said to you earlier, my wife and I thank you all for helping put our children through college. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. And everybody head over to the Cape Fear Facebook page so you can see the virtual reading. And Robert will be doing the virtual reading of a chapter on Monday night. So
Monday night, 8:00. I'll be there.
Stay tuned for that. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Take good care.
Everybody on Facebook for joining us.
Yeah.